Good morning. Welcome back to Morning at 10 TV. My name is Mala Kivila Odera. Now today on the solution segment, we'll be trying to see how best can we fight this vice, child marriages in the country. Now, 1 out of 5 girls in the country are married off before they get to the age of 18 years old. 1 out of 5. That's a huge number of girls. And of course, it is a question that we are asking, an issue that we need to fight. Now, remember, tomorrow, Uganda will be joining the world in celebrating the International Day of the Girl. So what can you and I do to ensure that we fight this vice effectively? In studios, I have Mr. Timothy Opobo, who is a child protection and advocacy manager at the Child Fund International, who will help us unravel how best we can be part, actually take part in fighting this vice. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you very much.
You are on the ground as Child Fund International. You are in 33 districts in the country trying to preach this message and trying to get people off the culture of marrying off girls before they get to the age of 18 years old. How bad is the situation on ground?
Well, as a country, I personally call it a crisis. I think we have a crisis on our hands. You just said 1 in 5. We have a teenage pregnancy rate of about 24%. And, you know, research actually shows us that up to 45% of girls are married off before the age of 18.
Right.
And when you look at those between the lower level, which is 15 and below, there's still about 35%. So it is a big problem. It's a huge problem, actually. In my opinion, I say it's a crisis, because it means out of every 10 girls that go, you know, to primary school, we have a dropout rate of about 68%. That means only about 3 actually do the cycle.
Right.
And therefore it's alarming. It's definitely alarming.
It's alarming.
Yeah.
And when you go on ground, what should you attribute this to? Of course, Andrew Chamagero was on ground in Chibuku just to see, trying to find out, is it a livelihood issue? Is it a poverty issue? Why are we having these cases so rampant in the country?
Well, it's a number of issues. It's quite a number of issues. You know, poverty is definitely a factor, and we cannot disregard the impact that the poverty is playing, especially, I mean, in a household where parents, you know, have quite a huge number of children. Let's say, you know, what really happens is because of inability to be able to meet the demand of the household, this girl is then seen as a source of wealth, because normally marriage means that somebody is going to bring something or pay something. And so girls are therefore then sacrificed as an option to be able to bring in. So yes, poverty is a factor, but it's not just poverty. It's also the issue of our culture, social norms, right. Beliefs and attitudes towards the girl child. You know, in very many of our communities here in Uganda, you go down to, and the perception about the girl is, you know, once she reaches a certain age, once a girl has begun to experience a menstrual cycle, once she's developed breasts, the mindset is that she's ready for marriage. And this is why I always, I'm saying, when we talk about children, the mindset normally is somebody below the age of 18. But when you go down to the community, that's not what a child is. A child is somebody who has not yet experienced their menstrual cycle, if it's a girl, or who hasn't yet developed breasts. So once they do this, then in the mindset of the communities, and some of, you know, people say, no, she's an adult now, she's ready for marriage. And so there is that drive as well, which has to be addressed. And the issue of the gender bias, you know, as I said, when things are hard in the household, the girl is then sacrificed so that the boy continues.
Right.
And so we will marry off this girl so that we get this funds or whatever to be able to send the boy to continue with school. So the girl is in sacrifice because in the mindset of some of our community people, some of our parents, is the girl is not as important as the boy.
Right, right.
And that's a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, we know community leaders have a role to play. Yeah. The country already has policies that protect against such vices, child marriages. But what happens on ground if we have community leaders in place? Now we have the LC1, you know, leaders in place as well. Then why is it then so hard to bring to book such perpetrators?
Well, you know, social change must come from within. That's one thing. It does not necessarily come from outside. And we do have many political leaders. The challenge we have with political leaders is they're politicians. In other words, they go with the tide and they have to play to the music that's been played at the community level. And when they are seen to maybe question some of these things, it means they may lose popularity.
Right.
But nevertheless, community leaders have a huge role to play. We have the newly elected local council leaders, and they have a huge role to play because they are the closest to the communities. And they have a responsibility to be able to educate communities, educate parents, and let them know why it's important for us not to marry off girls at a young age, why it's important for girls to complete their education. So they do have an important role to play. You mentioned the issue of policies, and as a country we are not short of that. I can tell you that we, working very closely with the government, developed a national strategy against child marriage. The government is in the process of developing a children's policy. And all these things are in there. They're very well documented. But policy is almost useless if it is not backed by adequate resources to be able to implement these policies.
So what you're saying is there's a resources issue?
A huge resources issue.
Okay.
And it becomes an impediment to the implementation of these policies. So yes, you have this on paper. You have it very well written. We must do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. And it's clear, and you believe that if these things are actually done, I think we can begin to see change. But these actions, these strategies require resources. And that is where the issue of prioritization comes in. That is where, as a government, looking at this crisis, look at primary school, for example, the UPE policy. One of the biggest detrimental issues to UPE success is the dropout rate of children. A dropout rate of 68%.
That's a high number.
It's a high number. And therefore, they must be concerned, because why are people dropping out and who are dropping out?
Let me ask you, someone would argue that when it comes to implementation of policies such as, you know, child protection, the fight against early marriages, would not necessarily need resources for that to happen, for implementation to happen. So when you allude to the fact that we are still struggling on resources to implement these policies, what exactly do you mean? Bring us down, let us understand that.
Okay, that's a fair, good question. So first of all, when I talk about resources, resources implies quite a number of things. You have laws, you have policies. You want to undertake sensitization campaigns across this country. You want to use the media across the country. This takes money to be able to run very strong, successful campaigns. One of the reasons the HIV/AIDS campaign was very successful was because there was an investment in it.
Correct.
And this investment was, one, financial. The second is the human resource. People must be trained to be able to, our political leaders, the leaders you're talking about, must be sensitized, they must be equipped with this information, with this knowledge, to be able to reach out to communities, because they're not going to go to communities to speak without information. They must be, so in other words, there's an issue of investing in building the capacity of those people that need to be able to reach out to the communities. And these are the resources I'm talking about. This is what is required. Besides that, the issue of parenting education. How are we going to reach out to parents? So we cannot avoid it, unfortunately. And these are the resources I speak about. We must equip people with this information. We must drum it down, because if we are going to create change, if we're going to empower the girl child, if we're going to go into schools to be able to do this, we're going to go into communities and households, the resources must be available.
I get you.
Yeah.
Already you've alluded to the fact that, you know, political leaders, community leaders are failing. But who else can be the next person who would maybe, you know, influence and preach these messages effectively, not just to the girls, but also to the parents who hold a higher stake in this?
Well, first of all, let me say community members are probably not doing enough. They're not failing, but they're not probably doing enough. I think that's what I should
leaders.
say. Yeah, and they have a role to play. But you know, who else? Who else can play a very significant role? As I said, the issue of child marriage is also very much driven by social norms, by cultural relations, by cultural roots.
Right.
And so we must therefore look at who have the biggest influence in our communities. Who are the people that the communities are listening to? Yes, political leaders, but as I said, there's a catch with political leaders. And then you have to look at people like the cultural leaders. I always give this example, and you know, if you look at our setup as a country, cultural leaders wield a lot of weight,
right,
and their word goes. So cultural leaders have a very strong role to play. And therefore, even in addressing this issue, I would advise and say, you know, government must tap into the influence of cultural leaders. So because people listen to their cultural leaders. The other group is the religious leaders. People listen to the religious leaders. Once an imam stands and speaks at a mosque on Friday, people listen.
Right.
Once a pastor speaks to his people on Sunday, people listen. When the priest stands on the pulpit or the reverend, people listen. So they have a very strong role to play. And therefore, they must be brought into this discussion. Not at the back of it, but at the front.
Right.
Yeah.
We've been having, like you said, quite a huge number of school dropouts. You know, thanks to this vice, you know, child marriages, it's a huge impediment in the actually rural areas. But the teachers, them that are close to these girls on a day-to-day basis, how best can they be equipped? Because we know before we get to a Sunday where this girl will go to church, if at all she will, before we get to, you know, this community kind of, you know, meetings where the cultural leaders, you know, are there, we have schools where these girls go on a day-to-day basis. So how best can these teachers be equipped with information such that they can have that influence over these girls, equip them with knowledge such that they know, I also have a word in this, I have a say in how the direction my life will take?
Yeah, I think that's very. I think that's fair, and I think the teachers have a very strong role to play. The teachers are with children every day. They are able to see who started in P1 and who was dropped out by P4.
Right.
Many times the teachers are rendered powerless because they don't go as far as really following up these children. And I think that's something that a role they have to play. To understand, why has Anita, why has Irene, why has Sophia not dropped out of school? What is happening? Can I call the parents to find out? Can I reach out to the fellow children? This information is available in communities. It's not far off. And many times, they know, they hear, and so they have a responsibility to contact the authorities to say, we have seen this happen in areas where we are working. We have seen marriages stopped in Lango, for example, where we have done some work. The teachers played a role in letting us know that, you know, this girl has been dropped out, and we've got information from their fellow children that she's going to be married off over the weekend. And we were able to actually intervene and save this girl. She was only 13 years old, you see. And so the teachers should not fold their hands, I would say that, because they know this, they know what is happening. They have this information. And I think there must be a relationship, therefore, between the teachers and law enforcement.
Right.
The other challenge, again, as I said, is many of these weddings we're talking about, these child weddings, I would like to call them that, are even presided over by LCs, local councils.
Imagine that.
Yes, you see. And so we must be able to bring these people to book. You know, we talk about these things, but there must be examples. Somebody must be brought and made accountable. A parent who gives off their child at 10 years old to be married should be locked up, and people must see that they are locked up.
True.
For this message to be understood.
But is it happening?
Not to the level that it should. They are very isolated incidences of when it happens or where it happens. They are isolated. It's not because there's a general acceptance. And I said this is where culture and social norms comes in, because even the law enforcement officers in some of these places, the law enforcement officers come from the communities. And many of them also think it's okay. Many of them think, yeah, it's fine. This is what, it's a normal thing.
Right.
So you have a disconnect between the law, the mindset, the social norm, the social practice. And that is a problem. And that's why sometimes the law is not implemented, by the way.
The other issue we've been seeing, especially over the past few months, is what the Ministry of Education is trying to do, introduce sexuality education in schools. Do you feel that this will help, just equipping the girls, making them know that this is what is happening in my body, I need to stay in school, just for them to be equipped with this information and this knowledge about, because I know most of the times, like we were speaking just before we went on air, is ignorance on the part of the girls. They don't know what their bodies are going through, they don't know their rights and stuff like that. So would this help in fighting this vice?
Very much so. I think that I agree with the strategy that the Ministry of Education is taking. I think sexual education, sexual and reproductive health education is important for both the boys and the girls, so that there is understanding of what is happening to their bodies, but also empowering them to be able to know what to do about their situation and how to handle their situation. It has been a very controversial topic in some sessions, but I think sexual education, reproductive health, girls knowing where can I get help, where can I get services, what can I do when this is happening to my body is crucial. It's very important. Yeah.
But when you go on ground, because I know you also advocate for this, you interact with these girls, what is their reception to what you're trying to do to them, helping them, giving them this information? What's their reception like?
I think generally girls are very positive about their well-being. I think if you went and asked, almost 99% of girls want to stay in school. 9% of the girls want to finish their education. They want to become something productive. And many times a lot of what is happening is not within their control, and that's where the gender issue comes in, because they don't make these decisions. The decision for her to be married off is many times not her decision. Unfortunately, as we note, is that because they have been made to believe that it is okay, so some of them think it's okay, I must listen to my parent if he says he knows what is best for me.
Right.
And so that then renders them powerless. But deep inside, when you talk to these girls, they don't want to be married off. These are children. These are children, and you're expecting them to go and have other children. So they don't want this at all. They're positive. I want to stay in school is what is the message. I want to finish my education. But my father says he cannot afford to send us all to school. So I'm going to be married off so that my brothers can continue. That's the problem.
Yeah. There's this other issue about, family planning, and it has been a controversial discussion. Andrew Chamagero was on ground in Chibuku, and we saw this together. And there's one person that said that many a times they get to that place where they have to marry these children, I'll call them that because they're under 18, because they were engaged, they actually engaged them in sexual activity and they got pregnant. So once a girl gets pregnant, what the cultural leaders demand is that you marry her and take control and take responsibility of this particular pregnancy. So as you go on ground as well, as what you do as Child Fund International, are you also pushing for this contraception? Is it something that you're keen on? Because we were having a discussion and we were saying girls get to a point whereby the young people, even men, get to a point whereby they don't understand how their bodies react. Suddenly I'm attracted to, you know, John, and somehow if you don't have this information, I get pregnant. So contraception. How is it on ground?
I think contraception is a very controversial issue in this country, and it's also not very well taken, first of all, especially if you begin to preach contraception to children. It would get, and probably rightly say, a lot of resistance. I think where we need to put our effort is really on empowering these children, on sensitizing these children. What you spoke about, the issue of reproductive health education, so that they understand. And, you know, as you said, once these little girls get pregnant, the next option is you have to marry her off. Why? Because the father said you've messed, you need to pay for what you have done. And
Right.
but we have a law which already says that what you have done is criminal. Now, and that's why this issue is very complex, because the father says, now my daughter is not going to go to school anymore, she's pregnant. And that's why we must address and we must provide the opportunity for little girls that have pregnant and have given birth to get back into school. And this is something that must be deliberate. I know in our neighboring country, Tanzania, that this is, you know, is unaccepted, but we must give them the opportunity. These are children. They are children. And so their life must not end with a teenage pregnancy. We must provide those services. I think the investment should be in prevention. We shouldn't allow this to happen as much as possible. But we cannot control it 100%.
But let me ask you a question. It is already happening. Just the other day we were having this discussion, and reality is young people, young children are engaging in sexual activity.
Exactly.
So how then can we embrace reality and help them protect themselves? You
know, Mala, we are living in a very interesting age, if I would put it that way. This era that we are in is probably unprecedented in history, in the sense that the amount of information that the public, that children have access to, has never been like this in the history of the world.
Right, right.
So children, and this is very important, we're talking about reality. The children that are out there today are exposed to so much information at an early age. So children as young as 6 years old, 7 years old, are seeing what probably when I was young I did not see. Now that is one reality. It means we must address the issue of access to information. What information are children getting? That is one. We might not be able to control it, but we must be aware. The children having this information are therefore getting more vulnerable and more prone to early sexual activity. Right. In fact, it is true that now children are engaging in sex earlier than before, at an unprecedented level.
Even at 10 years old.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so that we cannot bury our heads in the sand and say we are not seeing this. What it means, we must speak to these children openly about these issues. We can't hide, because they have this information. They are watching it every day. They're seeing it in the newspapers. They're seeing it on social media. Children have phones, have tablets. This is a reality. It's on TV every day. And so we must confront it. We must begin to speak to our children about these issues early enough. The thing is that we are burying our heads in the sand, and before you know it, the girl appears before you're pregnant.
So what you're saying is the solution would be speaking frankly to these children and not giving them contraception option.
I think the contraception option should not be pronounced. This is my personal opinion as Timothy.
All right.
I think that we, as parents, we must know our children. We must share all the information. Yes, we must tell children about contraception. I think we should tell them about it. But we shouldn't put it as a first option to say, you know, go and you do this. Yeah. I think that we must have a genuine conversation with our children. We must let them know what the dangers are engaging in early sex. We must let them know why it's important for them not to engage in early sex and why it's important for them to focus on their education.
Okay.
I think we must have those frank discussions. We can't run away from it anymore.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Tomorrow, Uganda will be joining the entire world in celebrating, you know, the girl child. So what should we be expecting tomorrow from Child Fund International? What are you, you know, preparing for that day?
Well, as an organization, I think we recognize the Day of the Girl Child, and for us, it's an opportunity to do advocacy. It's an opportunity for us to speak about these issues more. It's an opportunity to bring attention to these issues, and
Right.
across the areas where we're working, this is what we're going to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting with communities, reaching out to communities and saying, we need to keep these girls in school. It's important because, you know, we talk about socioeconomic transformation, and I want to say this very strongly, that as a country, as a region, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, we will not achieve economic, social transformation with the teenage pregnancy rate at 24%.
Right.
We will not achieve it with 45% of girls being married off before the age of 18. We will not. We must invest in human capital.
Mm-hmm.
Human capital are these children we're talking about. If 68% of them are dropping out of school at primary school level, you have a transition to secondary school of only 25%,
We're in real trouble.
we're in trouble.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Timothy Opobo, the Child Protection and Advocacy Manager at Child Fund International. Thank you so much, sir, for making time. You have heard it. You have a role to play, especially if you're a parent. Speak to these girls and boys at an early age. They do understand. Let them understand what their bodies are going through. Let them understand how they can take care of themselves so we can bring these numbers down. That has been the discussion on the Solution segment. Morning at 10 TV still continues. Up next is Take Note.